In New Bern, North Carolina, on a quiet street lined with historic homes, stand a Victorian house that most people walk past without a second glance. This is the former home of Caleb Bradham, the pharmacist who created Pepsi-Cola in 1898 and built it into a successful regional brand. For a brief period in the early 1900s, Bradham was a millionaire, respected businessman, and pillar of his community. His home reflected that success. Elegant, comfortable, the house of a man who had created something valuable. But Bradham's story doesn't follow the usual trajectory of American business success. He didn't die wealthy in a mansion, passing his empire to heirs. Instead, he lost everything in 1923 when a failed bet on sugar prices bankrupted his company. He spent his final years working as a low-level employee for the very company he had founded, living modestly, largely forgotten. This is the story of how Pepsi-Cola was created in a small-town pharmacy and grew into a global empire worth hundreds of billions of dollars. But it's also the story of how that empire was built on addiction. Not to cocaine or heroin, but to sugar and caffeine, legal drugs that hook children and contribute to an obesity epidemic that kills hundreds of thousands of Americans annually. It's the story of how soft drink companies market poison to children, fight regulations designed to protect public health, and generate enormous profits while externalizing the costs onto individuals, families, and the healthcare system. And it's the story of a man who created something he thought was harmless, lost control of it, watched it become something much darker than he intended, and died having been destroyed by his own creation. Caleb Davis Bradham was born in 1867 in Chinkapin, North Carolina, to a prosperous family. His father was a merchant and civic leader. Caleb was educated, ambitious, and initially planned to become a doctor. He attended the University of North Carolina and then the University of Maryland School of Medicine. But in 1893, his father's business failed, and the family lost most of their money. Caleb had to drop out of medical school and return to North Carolina to help support his family. He took a job as a pharmacist in New Bern, eventually buying the drugstore where he worked. Bradham's pharmacy, like most pharmacies of the 1890s, had a soda fountain where customers could purchase carbonated beverages mixed with various flavored syrups. These drinks were popular refreshments, and pharmacists would experiment with different flavors and combinations to attract customers. In 1893, Bradham created a new drink he initially called Brad's Drink. It was a cola-flavored carbonated beverage made with sugar, water, caramel, lemon oil, nutmeg, and other natural additives, along with cola nut extract, which contains caffeine, and, initially, coca leaf extract, which contains small amounts of cocaine. The drink was popular with customers. It was sweet, fizzy, and caffeinated, everything the human brain evolved to crave. The sugar provided instant energy. The caffeine was mildly addictive. The carbonation made it refreshing. It was, by design, something people would want to drink again and again. In 1898, Bradham renamed the drink Pepsi-Cola, a name derived from pepsin, a digestive enzyme, and cola, the nut that provided caffeine. He began marketing it as a digestive aid and energy booster, making health claims that had no scientific basis but were common in the patent medicine industry of the era. Bradham had no idea he'd created what would become one of the most valuable brands in the world. He thought he'd made a pleasant-tasting carbonated beverage that might sell well locally. What he'd actually created was an addictive product that would hook billions of people and generate hundreds of billions of dollars in profits over the next century. Pepsi-Cola's early success was modest, but real. Bradham bottled and sold it throughout North Carolina and neighboring states. By 1902, he had incorporated the Pepsi-Cola Company and was running a small but growing business out of New Bern. The drink's popularity grew through the 1900s and 1910s. Bradham opened bottling plants, signed franchise agreements, and expanded distribution. By 1910, Pepsi-Cola had franchises in 24 states and was bringing in significant revenue. Bradham became wealthy, not Rockefeller wealthy, but comfortable by the standards of small-town North Carolina. He built a larger home in New Bern, a 3-story Victorian house with modern conveniences. He became a community leader, respected businessman, and local success story. He employed dozens of people directly and hundreds more through his franchise system. Pepsi-Cola was a North Carolina success story, proof that a small-town pharmacist could build something significant. But the foundation of that success was troubling, even if Bradham didn't recognize it. Pepsi-Cola was succeeding because it was addictive. The sugar and caffeine created a mild physical dependence. The more you drank, the more you wanted to drink. And Bradham was marketing it aggressively, particularly to young people, creating customers who would drink Pepsi for life. This business model, create an addictive product, market it heavily to children, build lifelong customers, was standard practice in the soft drink industry. Coca-Cola, Pepsi's main competitor, was doing the same thing. But standard practice doesn't mean ethical practice. These companies were hooking children on products that would harm their health if consumed regularly. Bradham, by all accounts a decent man who cared about his community, probably didn't think of it this way. He saw Pepsi as a refreshing beverage, not as an addictive substance. He didn't have modern knowledge about the health effects of excessive sugar consumption. He genuinely believed he was selling something harmless. But ignorance doesn't eliminate culpability. Bradham was building a business model predicated on getting people, especially young people, to consume as much of his product as possible. The fact that he didn't understand the long-term consequences doesn't change what those consequences would be. World War I brought both opportunity and disaster to Pepsi-Cola. Sugar prices fluctuated wildly during the war due to supply disruptions and government price controls. In 1920, Bradham made a calculated bet. He bought large quantities of sugar at high prices, betting that prices would continue rising as the war's effects continued. He was wrong. Sugar prices collapsed. Bradham was stuck with expensive sugar that he'd borrowed heavily to purchase, sugar that was now worth a fraction of what he'd paid. He tried to keep the company solvent by taking on more debt, but it was hopeless. In 1923, the Pepsi-Cola company declared bankruptcy. Bradham lost everything. The company, the bottling plants, the franchises, the formula, all were sold to pay creditors. Roy C. Megargle, a Wall Street financier, bought the Pepsi trademark and formula for $30,000. Bradham's two-decade empire was gone. At age 56, Caleb Bradham was broke. He had to sell his home and move to a smaller house. He took a job as a salesman, then later as a low-level employee for a company that had bought some of Pepsi's former operations. The man who had created Pepsi-Cola was now working for a company using his formula, with no ownership stake and no special recognition. It was a complete reversal of fortune, the kind that only happens in America, from millionaire businessman to near poverty in a matter of months. Bradham's gamble on sugar prices had destroyed him financially. But here's the tragic irony. While Bradham was personally ruined, Pepsi-Cola as a brand and product continued. Other people would build fortunes on his creation. The formula he developed would generate billions in profits, just not for him. After Bradham's bankruptcy, Pepsi-Cola changed hands several times during the 1920s and early 1930s. The brand struggled, went through multiple bankruptcies, and nearly disappeared entirely. But in 1931, the Pepsi-Cola company was purchased by Charles Goose, president of Loft Incorporated, a candy and fountain store chain. Goose reformulated Pepsi slightly and made a crucial marketing decision. He would sell Pepsi in 12-ounce bottles for the same price Coca-Cola charged for 6-ounce bottles, twice as much for a nickel. This value proposition was successful during the Depression when every penny mattered. Pepsi's sales grew. The company stabilized, expanded, and by the 1940s was firmly established as Coca-Cola's main competitor. After Goose's death, the company continued growing, going public in 1950 and expanding internationally throughout the 1950s and 60s. In 1965, Pepsi-Cola merged with Frito-Lay to form PepsiCo, a massive food and beverage conglomerate. This merger was strategic genius from a business perspective. Combine addictive beverages with addictive snack foods, market them together, create customers who consume both. PepsiCo grew into one of the largest food and beverage companies in the world. Today, it owns dozens of brands beyond Pepsi: Mountain Dew, Gatorade, Tropicana, Quaker, Lay's, Doritos, Cheetos, and many others. The company generates over $90 billion in annual revenue and is one of the most valuable corporations on earth. And Caleb Bradham, the man who created the formula that started it all, he died in 1934 at age 67, largely forgotten, having spent his final years in relative poverty. His obituary in local papers noted that he had created Pepsi-Cola, but focused more on his work as a pharmacist and community member. The empire he had started was mentioned as historical trivia, not as his defining achievement. He never saw the billions his creation would generate. He never saw Pepsi become a global brand. He never saw PepsiCo become one of the world's largest corporations. He just saw his own bankruptcy and failure. But while Bradham's personal story ended in failure, the legacy of what he created grew darker. As Pepsi-Cola expanded throughout the 20th century, it became part of a broader public health disaster, the American obesity epidemic. Soft drinks like Pepsi are essentially sugar delivery systems. A 20-ounce bottle of Pepsi contains 69 grams of sugar, more than double the American Heart Association's recommended daily maximum for adults, and nearly 4 times the maximum for children. A single bottle of Pepsi exceeds what a child should consume in an entire day. But people don't drink just one. The average American consumes about 39 gallons of soft drinks per year, roughly 400 cans or bottles. That's an enormous amount of sugar, contributing to obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and other health problems. The numbers are staggering. Over 40% of American adults are obese. Childhood obesity has tripled since the 1970s. Type 2 diabetes, once rare in children, is now increasingly common. And excessive sugar consumption, particularly from soft drinks, is a major contributor to all of these problems. This didn't happen by accident. Soft drink companies like PepsiCo have spent decades marketing their products aggressively, particularly to children and teenagers. They've sponsored sports events, placed advertisements in schools, created brand loyalty programs for kids, and done everything possible to hook young customers. The strategy is simple and effective. Get children addicted to your product early, and they'll drink it for life. A child who starts drinking Pepsi at age 8 will likely still be drinking it at age 40, consuming thousands of dollars worth of product over a lifetime and suffering the health consequences. PepsiCo knows this. Internal documents, released through litigation and investigative journalism, show that the company has long understood that sugary drinks contribute to obesity and health problems. They know their products are harmful when consumed regularly, and they've continued marketing them aggressively anyway, particularly to children. The marketing strategies used by PepsiCo and other soft drink companies are sophisticated and insidious. They don't just advertise their products. They create cultural associations between their brands and positive experiences. Pepsi sponsors major sporting events, associating the brand with athleticism, even though drinking Pepsi regularly makes you less athletic. They use celebrity endorsements from musicians and actors that teenagers idolize. They place products in movies and TV shows. They create social media campaigns that make drinking Pepsi seem cool, rebellious, or aspirational. They also target vulnerable communities. Poor neighborhoods often have fewer grocery stores and more convenience stores, where soft drinks are prominently displayed and marketed. Communities of color are specifically targeted with advertising campaigns designed to appeal to cultural touchstones and celebrities. Latino and Black communities in America have higher rates of obesity and diabetes than white communities, and aggressive soft drink marketing in these communities is a contributing factor. PepsiCo knows this. Their marketing departments explicitly target these demographics, but continues the practice because it's profitable. The company also fights any attempt to reduce consumption through public health measures. When cities try to tax sugary drinks, PepsiCo spends millions on lobbying and advertising campaigns to defeat the taxes. When schools try to remove soft drinks from cafeterias, PepsiCo fights to keep them. When health organizations call for warning labels on soft drinks, PepsiCo funds studies to create doubt about the health risks. This is the same playbook tobacco companies use for decades. Create doubt, fund sympathetic research, fight regulation, and protect profits at all costs. PepsiCo learned from tobacco's mistakes. They're more subtle, more sophisticated in their messaging, but the fundamental strategy is the same. Caleb Bradham's home in New Bern still stands, now a private residence. It's a beautiful Victorian house, well-maintained, unremarkable except for a historical marker noting that the creator of Pepsi-Cola once lived there. If you turn New Bern, you can visit the site of Bradham's original pharmacy, where Pepsi was created. There's a small museum about Pepsi's origins, and the town celebrates its connection to the brand. It's all very quaint and positive. A small-town success story about a local pharmacist who created something famous. What the museum and historical markers don't emphasize is what Pepsi has become. A product that contributes to hundreds of thousands of deaths annually through obesity, diabetes, and heart disease. They don't discuss PepsiCo's aggressive marketing to children. They don't mention the company's efforts to fight public health regulations. They don't talk about how the formula Bradham created has been weaponized into a tool for extracting profit while externalizing massive health costs. The sanitized version presented in New Bern is understandable. The town is proud of its connection to a famous brand, and acknowledging the darker aspects would complicate that pride. But the sanitization is also a form of historical dishonesty. Pepsi-Cola is not a neutral product. It's a major contributor to public health problems, and those problems disproportionately affect the most vulnerable populations. Bradham himself probably would have been horrified by what his creation became. By all accounts, he was a decent man who cared about his community. He created Pepsi-Cola as a refreshing beverage, not as a tool for exploiting children and vulnerable communities. He lost his fortune trying to keep his company solvent, not because he was extracting maximum profit at any cost, but his intentions don't change the outcome. The formula he created has been used to generate enormous profits while contributing to massive public health problems. And the mansion he built with early Pepsi profits, modest compared to later corporate wealth, but significant for its time, stands as a monument to the beginning of that trajectory. The broader soft drink industry, of which Pepsi is a major part, is worth examining in its own right. This is an industry that has no redeeming nutritional value. Soft drinks provide calories and caffeine, but nothing beneficial. They actively harm health when consumed regularly. And yet it's a $250+ billion annual industry in the United States alone. This is possible because the industry has successfully created a cultural expectation that soft drinks are normal, everyday beverages appropriate for all occasions. They're sold in schools, hospitals, and sport facilities. They're marketed at birthday parties, family gatherings, and celebrations. Drinking Pepsi or Coke is presented as an ordinary, unremarkable activity. But regularly consuming drinks that are 10% sugar by volume is not normal or healthy. It's a relatively recent phenomenon, and it's causing massive harm. Our bodies didn't evolve to handle this much sugar. The insulin spikes, the liver damage, the arterial inflammation, these are all consequences of consuming large amounts of refined sugar that our ancestors never encountered. The soft drink industry has normalized something profoundly abnormal. And they've done it so successfully that most people don't question it. Parents give their children Pepsi at dinner. Schools serve in cafeterias. Hospitals sell it in vending machines next to cancer treatment centers. This normalization is the industry's greatest achievement and most damaging legacy. They've made it seem unremarkable to consume a product that is literally poisoning you, slowly contributing to diseases that will kill you decades later. PepsiCo's response to criticism about health effects has evolved over the years, but remains fundamentally dishonest. In the 1990s and early 2000s, they denied that soft drinks contributed significantly to obesity or health problems. They funded research designed to create doubt and deflect blame to other factors. As evidence became overwhelming, they shifted strategy. Now they acknowledge that obesity is a problem, but argue it's about personal responsibility and balanced lifestyles. They emphasize that Pepsi can be part of a healthy diet if consumed in moderation, which is technically true, but misleading. The problem is that their entire business model is based on people not consuming in moderation. They need people to drink Pepsi regularly, frequently, habitually. Moderation is the enemy of profits. So while they publicly promote moderation, their marketing encourages excess. PepsiCo has also introduced diet versions of their drinks, Pepsi Zero, Diet Pepsi, which they market as healthier alternatives. But diet sodas have their own health concerns, particularly around artificial sweeteners. And introducing diet options doesn't address the fundamental problem. They're still marketing addictive beverages to children, just with different additives. The company has also diversified into products they can market as healthier: bottled water, juice, sports drinks, energy drinks. This allows them to present themselves as a diverse food and beverage company, rather than as a sugar pusher. But many of these healthier alternatives are still loaded with sugar or problematic ingredients. Gatorade, owned by PepsiCo, is marketed as a sports drink for active people, but contains substantial sugar and is unnecessary for anyone who isn't engaged in intense, prolonged athletic activity. Most people who drink Gatorade would be better off drinking water. But water is less profitable and doesn't create the same brand loyalty. The political influence wielded by PepsiCo and the broader soft drink industry is another dark aspect of this story. The company spends tens of millions annually on lobbying and political contributions at federal, state, and local levels. This money buys access and influence. When public health advocates propose soda taxes, PepsiCo lobbies against them. When nutritionists call for removing soft drink from schools, PepsiCo funds opposition campaigns. When regulators consider restrictions on marketing to children, PepsiCo fights those restrictions. The company also funds political campaigns for politicians who will protect industry interests. They donate to both parties, ensuring access regardless of who's in power. And they fund front groups and industry associations that can fight regulations while maintaining a degree of separation for PepsiCo's brand. This political influence means that public health measures that could reduce soft drink consumption face enormous obstacles. Even modest proposals, like requiring warning labels or limiting advertising to children, are blocked by industry lobbying. The political system has been captured, at least partially, by the soft drink industry money. This is how Pepsi-Cola went from Caleb Bradham's pharmacy to a public health crisis that kills hundreds of thousands annually. It wasn't just about creating an addictive product. It was about building the political and marketing infrastructure to protect that product from regulation, to ensure continued access to children, to externalize health costs while privatizing profits. Bradham couldn't have imagined this when he mixed his first batch of Brad's drink in 1893. He was just trying to create something people would enjoy. But the forces he unleashed, corporate consolidation, addiction-based business models, regulatory capture, have created something much larger and darker than one pharmacist's beverage recipe. The environmental costs of the soft drink industry add another layer of darkness to this story. PepsiCo produces billions of plastic bottles annually. Most are not recycled and end up in landfills, oceans, or incinerated, releasing toxins. The company has made pledges about reducing plastic use and increasing recycling, but these pledges consistently fall short of actual change. It's more profitable to continue producing cheap, single-use plastic bottles than to invest in genuinely sustainable alternatives. Water usage is another concern. Producing Pepsi requires enormous amounts of water, both as an ingredient and for manufacturing processes. In some regions, PepsiCo's water usage has contributed to water stress and conflicts with local communities who need that water for drinking and agriculture. The company has faced accusations of depleting aquifers, polluting water sources, and prioritizing corporate profit over community water security. In India, protests against PepsiCo's water usage have sometimes turned violent as communities fought to protect their water supply. And what is PepsiCo using all this water for? To produce a beverage that harms health, that creates enormous plastic waste, that generates profit for shareholders while externalizing every possible cost. It's environmental destruction in service of public health destruction, all to maintain a business model based on getting people addicted to sugar water. There's also a racial and class dimension to the soft drink industry's impact. Obesity and diabetes rates are highest in poor communities and communities of color. This isn't coincidental. It's the result of deliberate targeting. Poor neighborhoods have fewer full-service grocery stores and more convenience stores, where soft drinks are prominently displayed and heavily marketed. These neighborhoods also have fewer recreational facilities, less access to health care, and more fast food restaurants, all factors that contribute to poor health outcomes. Soft drink companies like PepsiCo explicitly target these communities with advertising. They sponsor community events, put up billboards, and create marketing campaigns designed to appeal to specific racial and ethnic groups. They understand that these communities are vulnerable and that heavy marketing can drive consumption. The result is that the health impacts of soft drinks fall disproportionately on people who can least afford the resulting medical costs. Poor families buy Pepsi because it's cheap, readily available, and heavily marketed to them. Their children develop obesity and diabetes. The families face medical bills they can't afford. And PepsiCo faces no liability or responsibility for the health crisis they've helped create. This is environmental racism and economic exploitation disguised as consumer choice. Yes, people choose to buy Pepsi, but that choice is heavily influenced by marketing, availability, price, and cultural conditioning, all of which are controlled by PepsiCo and similar companies. Caleb Bradham died in 1934, before most of these consequences became apparent. He didn't live to see the obesity epidemic. He didn't see PepsiCo become a massive conglomerate. He didn't see his creation become a major contributor to public health problems. Would he have felt guilty if he had? Would he have taken responsibility? Or would he have rationalized it the way modern PepsiCo executives do? People make their own choices. It's not the company's fault if they consume too much. Personal responsibility matters more than corporate behavior. We can't know. But we do know that Bradham's final years were spent in relative poverty, working for a company that was using his formula. He had been pushed out, bankrupted by a bad business decision, left with nothing while others profited from his creation. There's a sad irony in this. Bradham was destroyed by the business side of Pepsi-Cola while the formula side, the actual product he created, went on to generate enormous profits for others. He gambled on sugar prices and lost everything. Later executives wouldn't gamble. They would simply pass health costs on to consumers and environmental costs on to communities while taking guaranteed profits. Bradham was, in some ways, too decent for the business he created. He took risks himself rather than externalizing them. He cared about his community rather than just extracting maximum profit. And he paid the price for those behaviors, dying broke while less scrupulous people built fortunes on his formula. Today, if you visit Caleb Bradham's former home in New Bern, you'll see a historic marker describing him as the creator of Pepsi-Cola. The marker presents this as an achievement, a point of local pride, evidence that great things can come from small towns. But the marker doesn't mention the 300,000 plus Americans who die annually from obesity-related causes, many of them linked to excessive soft drink consumption. It doesn't mention the millions of children being marketed addictive products. It doesn't mention the environmental destruction, the water conflicts, the targeting of vulnerable communities. It just says, here's where the guy who invented Pepsi lived. Isn't that neat? This historical amnesia, or willful ignorance, is characteristic of how we remember business history. We celebrate the creation of products and companies without reckoning with their consequences. We memorialize the entrepreneurs without acknowledging the costs of their innovations. Bradham deserves a more complicated legacy than he's received. He created something that has brought pleasure to billions of people. Pepsi does taste good, and in moderation it's relatively harmless. But he also created something that has been weaponized into a tool for exploiting addiction, harming health, and generating profit at enormous social cost. His mansion, modest by the standards of later corporate wealth, stands as the beginning of this trajectory. It's where the Pepsi fortune first manifested physically, before Bradham lost it, before it was rebuilt by others into something much larger and much darker. The comparison between Caleb Bradham and modern PepsiCo executives is instructive. Bradham created Pepsi, built a company, took risks, and ultimately failed when one of those risks didn't pay off. He lost his own money, faced bankruptcy, and spent his final years in reduced circumstances. Modern PepsiCo executives take no such personal risks. They're compensated with enormous salaries and stock options, regardless of company performance. If the company faces problems, they get golden parachutes. They never face personal bankruptcy or poverty. The risks are all externalized, onto consumers whose health is damaged, onto communities whose water is depleted, onto the environment that absorbs the pollution. And unlike Bradham, who seems to have genuinely believed his product was harmless, modern executives know exactly what they're selling and what it costs. They have access to decades of research showing that sugary drinks contribute to obesity and disease. They know their marketing targets children. They know that heavy consumption of their products harms health. And they keep doing it because it's profitable and because they face no personal consequences for the harm caused. This is the evolution of American capitalism that Bradham didn't live to see. From entrepreneurs who take personal risks to professional managers who externalize all risks while capturing rewards. from local businesses that have some connection to community impact to global corporations that are accountable to no one except shareholders. Bradham's bankruptcy was, in a perverse way, a form of accountability. He made a bad bet, and he personally paid the price. Modern corporations make bad decisions constantly, harming public health, destroying the environment, exploiting vulnerable populations, and face no comparable accountability. They pay occasional fines that are tiny compared to profits, and the executives responsible face no personal consequences. The dark story of Caleb Bradham's mansion is ultimately a story about what we celebrate and what we ignore. We celebrate the creation of a famous brand. We ignore the public health crisis that brand contributes to. We memorialize the entrepreneur. We forget the victims of his creation. Bradham's house in New Bern should be understood not just as the home of Pepsi's creator, but as the origin point of a century-long public health disaster. Every case of childhood obesity, every diabetes diagnosis, every heart attack linked to excessive sugar consumption, they all trace back, in part, to that pharmacy in New Bern where Bradham first mixed his cola formula. This doesn't make Bradham a monster. He was a pharmacist trying to create a pleasant-tasting beverage. But his creation was taken by others and transformed into something harmful, marketed aggressively, protected from regulation, and used to generate enormous profits while externalizing massive costs. The mansion is a monument to the beginning of that process. It's where the Pepsi fortune first took physical form, before it was lost and rebuilt into something much larger. It's a reminder that American business success stories are rarely as simple as we'd like to believe. Walking through New Bern today, you can see the markers of Pepsi's origins. The location of Bradham's pharmacy, the house where he lived, the historical plaques celebrating local connections to a global brand. What you don't see are the consequences. The children developing type 2 diabetes from excessive soft drink consumption. The families struggling with obesity-related health costs. The communities targeted by aggressive marketing. The environmental damage from plastic bottles and water depletion. Those consequences are distributed across the country and the world, invisible from New Bern, but very real. Pepsi-Cola didn't just create a brand and generate profits. It created a public health crisis that continues to worsen. And Caleb Bradham's mansion stands at the origin of that crisis. A beautiful Victorian house that represents the moment when a small-town pharmacist unknowingly created one of the most commercially successful and publicly harmful products in American history. The house is just a building, but what it represents, the beginning of a century of marketing addiction to children, externalizing health costs, and prioritizing profit over human welfare. That legacy is very much alive. It's in every school vending machine, every convenience store display, every advertisement targeting vulnerable communities. Bradham died broke and largely forgotten. But his creation lives on, generating billions in profits and contributing to hundreds of thousands of deaths annually. The mansion remains a monument not to his success, but to the dark trajectory his creation followed after he lost control of it. That's the real story. Not a quaint tale about a small-town pharmacist who invented a famous drink, but a darker narrative about how that drink became a tool for exploitation, how its creators were pushed aside by more ruthless operators, and how the costs of that exploitation are still being paid by the most vulnerable people in society. The Pepsi fortune started in Caleb Bradham's New Bern mansion, but it was built on the health of millions of people who would consume his product, on the exploitation of communities targeted by marketing, and on a century of prioritizing corporate profit over human welfare. That's the dark story, and it's far from over.